Aloha. Welcome to our hearing loss sensitivity training. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Roz Kia, and I'm the project coordinator for the Comprehensive Service Center for people who are deaf, hard of hearing, or deafblind. The CSC serves Hawaii's individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing, or deafblind, which means anyone with a hearing loss. We also support their families and the professionals who work with them. So if you know someone who has a hearing loss, whether it's congenital or late deafened, as with senior citizens, please tell them about us. We have classes, workshops, and social groups that they might enjoy. As you go through today's training, please keep track of any topics that you are interested in learning more about and include them in your evaluation. We want to grow our outreach topics, so your input would be very helpful. Today's presentation is provided through a collaboration with New Mexico Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing Persons. Karina Gutierrez, our presenter, is their Director of Community Advocacy. Karina is deaf and will be presenting in American Sign Language, so we have 2 interpreters today and captions. This workshop is also being recorded, and a link will be sent to all of you and posted to our website. If you think of others who might benefit from this
presentation. You want to just join in with me, Karen?
Okay. If you think of others who might benefit from this presentation, please feel free to share the recording with them. But if you could also share the evaluation link as well, that would be helpful because we need them included in our data reporting. Thank you so much for joining us today. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming our presenter, Karina Gutierrez.
Great. Thank you, Roz. Thank you for that introduction and for inviting me to present to all of you today. My presentation will be really beneficial for those of you who need to learn about working with deaf people. I would like to ask you all please to turn off your videos for the purposes of this presentation, leaving just myself and the interpreters on screen, because I also will be sharing my screen and that'll just make it easier to follow along. Roz, could you please give me permission to share screen? Thank you. Okay, thank you all for turning your videos off. It'll make it much easier for me to follow the interpreter. Now, working with deaf, hard of hearing, late deafened, and deafblind consumers is our topic. Some of you may be working with these folks already, may have friends or family members who have a hearing loss. And so you'll be learning to work together with them and be sensitive to each individual who has a hearing loss. And this will be very beneficial for all of you to have this information. So let's get the ball rolling. My name is Karina Gutierrez, and this is my name sign. In the deaf community, we have name signs to identify each other. In deaf culture, you may say, and an email may say, "Good morning, Mrs. Gutierrez," and so forth, or you may use those types of names. But in our culture, we use the name sign. We just say, "Hi, Karina," like this. We don't usually use those formal Mr., Mrs., with the last name. We just use our name sign. That's something that's very culturally appropriate for us. I'm the Director of Community Advocacy for the New Mexico Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, like Roz has already mentioned. I am deaf. I was born hearing. A few weeks later, I contracted viral meningitis. I was very, very ill, and that led to my deafness. And so I grew up at the deaf school in Santa Fe here in New Mexico. Spent my whole life here for the most part. I did go to Gallaudet University and also went to the liberal arts college, Gallaudet University Liberal Arts College, and I majored in physical education. I wanted to be a gym teacher, and then I realized that teaching might not really be my thing. I really felt more comfortable in the dorm, hanging out at the deaf school in the dorm with students there. So I worked there for a long time and then moved to New Mexico and worked in the deaf school here as well, not as a teacher. And then I saw this job posting and looking for a deaf specialist, and I applied for the job, and I have continued working for this agency, working with communication access. And I realized that I actually am an advocate and have been an advocate for a very, very long time for my friends and for people who are working on getting jobs and all sorts of the community, deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind community, providing access. So I've been in this job for a very long time, and I continue to stay here until I retire. That's my plan anyway. So now enough about myself. Let me move forward. And before I do, we're going to have some various slides. If you have any questions, please feel free to either turn your video on, speak your question for the interpreter to interpret, or put it in chat. Roz can help me to moderate what's going on in chat, see if there's any questions or comments there, but just feel free to ask questions as we go along. I'm going to start with this image here. You can see there's a tall boy. Looks like we're at a baseball game. And there's a tall boy standing behind the fence who's able to see everything on the field very clearly. And next to him, there's another boy who can kind of see okay. He can just barely see over the fence. And so he can catch some things, but not everything. And then the third boy isn't able to see anything at all. He's completely blocked. And so may not have any idea what's going on in the game other than what he can hear possibly. But he wouldn't have any idea really what's going on the field. So I want to apply this image to the community of folks with hearing loss, which includes deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind folks. This applies to our community in this way. The little boy on the right is deaf, would be deaf like us. We would have no access to information. People are talking away and we don't have any access to what's being said without any sort of accommodation. We have no idea what's happening. The boy in the middle would be considered hard of hearing. Can hear somewhat, maybe struggles a bit, but is able to speak for themselves, but does have some issues with hearing. And then the first person would be hearing. They have access to all information at all times. There's no possible problem with accessibility for that boy. And so I would be considered the little boy on the right having no access. Here in the second image, you can see some accommodations have been met. Everybody's able to access the game. And applying that to our community, providing access is similar to what we have today. We have an interpreter for my presentation. You all have access to the information for my presentation. If we did not have an interpreter and I was just signing away, you wouldn't have any idea what I was saying. You would say, what the heck is Karina talking about? She's just showing these pictures and I have no idea what she's referencing. And if you were speaking similarly, I would have no idea what you were saying. So having an interpreter provides access that's clear for our communication purposes. The hard of hearing community in this picture at the baseball game, they may have captions on an LED or some sort of screen, so they can be included. They're able to understand what's happening, not only in the game, but also just people in general. There are devices such as an FM system, which helps people to be able to hear when they're hard of hearing. If they rely on listening to spoken English or any other spoken language, that's a device that might work for them. For me, as a deaf person, using an FM system doesn't help me because I'm not able to hear at all. I'm completely deaf. So I rely on sign language. So it's different for each group depending on their level of deafness. Okay. And the third image here, let me just move this. And the third image, this is what I would call our dream world. This would be ideal. There's a chain link fence not blocking anything from being seen on the field. So in this case, this is what our community strives for, so that we have access to absolutely everything everywhere we go. Meaning if I go to a hospital, the interpreter's there. I don't have to go through the hassle of requesting an interpreter. If I'm at the hospital, they've got one on staff and they're there for me as soon as I get there. At the airport, I would have captions on the screen ready for me. I would have ways to communicate. And it is getting better in the airport, but we're not quite to the dream world yet. That's something that I hope will happen maybe 20 years from now, that we would achieve that ideal world or that dream world for us. The American with Disabilities Act, which was federal law that started almost 30 years ago or more, we're still struggling even since that law has been passed. We're fighting for accessibility, we're fighting for our needs, and all kinds of accommodations. For me, like I said, I need an interpreter. So I have to go through, when making a medical appointment, I need an interpreter. They say, no, we don't have one. And then I have to fight with them to do that. So even 30 years since the laws passed, we're fighting for our accommodation. So I'm not sure how long it's going to take for us to get to our dream world. It's a matter of continuing to educate people and in and without of our communities in the hearing world as well.
So you will notice throughout this presentation, the interpreter will switch and then the voice will change as well. And so let's go ahead and talk about identity. So I have a question for you. What do these words mean to you? You can go ahead and speak it. You can put on your camera. You can put it in the chat. So what do these words mean to you? For example, what does deaf mean to you? Yeah, someone said cannot hear. Anyone else have a comment? Communication differences. Yeah, so they communicate differently. Another answer was not able to hear anything. That's perfect. Thank you very much for your response. So deaf means a person that can't hear anything, fully deaf. But I do want to emphasize there are two different groups. There's one group that are fully deaf, but they can sign. They rely on sign for communication. There's another group who are deaf, but they don't know sign. They can speak. They have auditory loss. And so there's these two different groups within the deaf community. So now tell me what deaf blind means. What does deaf blind mean to you? It's silent. Can't hear. Can't hear, have limited visually hearing loss or sight loss. So they're not able to hear or see both. Auditory and visual loss. Loss of vision and hearing. That is wonderful. Your comments are wonderful. Thank you. So no hearing, no sight. So isolated. There's isolation involved. So thank you very much. So deaf blind means a person who is deaf and blind. So there's different degrees of vision loss. And it can vary. Some have a very narrow to a complete tunnel or complete vision loss. So it really ranges. So for a deafblind person, their accessibility can vary from person to person. If they're deaf, they're completely deaf, but having that visual loss, there is a range. So hard of hearing, what does hard of hearing mean to you? Yeah, variety of loss of hearing. So that's a good answer, yes. Hearing loss varies. So a hard of hearing person who has lost their hearing, they could hear a little bit or they could hear. It really depends on their decimal loss. It could be mild to profound hearing loss. So it ranges. But their first language a lot of times is spoken language. So they some do sign, some hard of hearing who goes to the deaf school, who does learn to sign, and they can speak and hear some, and they can go to the deaf school, and they also can go to Gallaudet University because ASL can be their first language. So now late deafened, what does that mean to you? So loss of hearing after they've learned to speak. Someone who has born with hearing and then loses their hearing later in life. Due to age, hearing loss later in life. That's great. That's perfect. Good answers. Yes, late deafened does mean losing their hearing later in loss. And a lot of it, the reason why could be age. It could be also listening to loud music growing up, and later on they can lose their hearing. And also it could be caused by hearing. If someone is involved in war and they hear bombs going off all the time, that can cause hearing loss as well. So it could be, medical virus, an accident. So yes, there are a variety of different reasons. Thank you. So the last one, speech disabled. What does that mean to you? Mute. Not able to speak. Limited function in their speech. Someone who has a hard time comprehending or understanding speech. Difficulty communicating. That's great. So the person maybe has their larynx removed, maybe for cancer or possible, car accident. They have to remove their larynx, and then that way they're not able to speak. So great answers. Thank you. So we'll go ahead and move on. So we want to give hearing loss a name. I just want to explain a few things about these different names. As you notice these on the slide, there's hearing impaired, there's deaf mute, and deaf and dumb. So this is the label that's been a label for our community for years. Oh, this person is hearing impaired. This person is deaf mute. This person is deaf and dumb. That's been, you still hear that to today. We don't like to use these three words. I know you've heard hearing impaired again and again and again. That's one that has been used for a very long time. But the government has decided to label us, the deaf community, hearing impaired. But really, that word hearing impaired means to us that someone needs to be fixed. But we don't need to be fixed. We have our language. We have our culture. We have all these things. Do we need to be fixed? Do we need our hearing fixed? Do we need our speech fixed? No, I have my language. I can socialize with a huge community. And so why they label us, they don't bother to ask us, hey, as the deaf community, what is the appropriate word to use? They just go ahead and label it. And hearing impaired is not appropriate. So instead of these 3 words used, these are the other words that should be used. Hard of hearing, deaf with a big D, deaf with a small d, and then also speech disabled. So there's 2 words that you see on the slide, deaf with a big D. I would be labeled deaf with a big D because I've gone to the deaf community and I communicate in sign language every D. Deaf with a small d who has auditory loss, but they don't know sign and their first language is really speech. They're not involved in the deaf community. And so that would be a small d, and I would be deaf with a capital D. You may be surprised, that there are still people that use hearing impaired. We encourage you to please do not use the word hearing impaired. In the medical profession, they still do, and we're encourage them to not use it. The state of Utah just passed a law that they are removing the word hearing impaired in any of their documents. And so we're hoping that New Mexico will follow suit as well. And we're hoping on the national level, it will change. They will change that word in the medical setting. They will change that to hearing loss instead of hearing impaired or hard of hearing deaf. So now we're going to talk about language. So you see English, you see Spanish, and you see American Sign Language. So in English, you can see this sentence, I have a red car. There's already rules and structures that you follow, the adjective, the subject, the noun. In Spanish, it says tengo un coche rojo. So Spanish has their same rules that they've already set up, and they follow the rules when it comes to sentences. Now in ASL, red car me have, huh? Oh my word, that seems like it's broken English. That's wrong. No, it really is not. ASL is not a written language. So our ASL is a visual language. And so we use our hands, we sign to communicate. So writing is different. Spoken English plus written English is different from our American Sign Language. For you that have interacted with people within the deaf community, maybe, not all deaf people are the same. They will vary in their reading and writing skills. Some are so proficient, some maybe not so much. So those individuals don't read and write very well. They may write something and they show it to you, or you write something and show it to them, and it has these big words and they have no idea what you are talking about. And they may write like you see here on the screen, and you may, what? They have this broken English. It's not that way because it's their ASL and that's how they can express it in written form. You may not be able to understand, but it's important that you as a hearing person and the deaf person, it may be there's not effective communication, and you need to then stop right there. It's important to know and acknowledge there is a difference between English and ASL. So the deaf person may not understand and there may be miscommunication. And so what you need to do is provide an interpreter so there is communication access between the two of you. So it's important to understand the differences in these languages. So really be compassionate, understanding, and recognize the difference in English and American Sign Language. And I will talk more about in the next coming slides. So deaf behavior. So how can you get a deaf person's attention? You can wave to them. You can tap their shoulder. This is the appropriate area to touch. Don't touch them on the head. Don't touch them on their back or on their arm or on their leg. Touch them in the shoulder area. That's the appropriate area. So for example, at a table, it depends on what kind of table you're using, but sometimes we can feel the vibration. And if you want to try to get a person's attention, you can tap on the table and the person can look up. You know, sometimes it really depends on the table and you may have to, it may not work and you may have to approach them and tap them on the shoulder. One thing I forgot on this PowerPoint slide is you can turn the light on and off very softly. Don't turn it on and off and on and off so the light is flickering really fast. Just very softly, the light turns on, turns off, and then you've got the deaf person's attention. So, you know, I forgot I needed to take that off as far as deaf voice. So ignore that on the slide. Elaboration of questions. So I want to explain about that. So when you ask us a question, we tend to answer, we tend to go on and on and on and elaborate on that question you asked. And then at the very end, there's the answer. It's like, why do you need to elaborate and expand? Why do you need to really, there's no need, but for the point is to help you understand. As the deaf community, we thirst for communication. Oh, do you know this? Do you know that? And then, or they'll elaborate and then they'll come to the, you know, they're answering your question. Growing up, we've been oppressed and we haven't been able to really say anything. It's like, oh, fine, somebody's asked me and then I'll go ahead and express everything until I get to the answer. So just listen to them while they explain, and then they will get to answering your question. So facial expression. So facial expression is a part of our culture and language. So for example, your tone. So when you're mad, your tone will go up. If you're happy and excited, your tone will go up. If you're sad, your tone will go down. So with our community, our facial expression, when we're mad, we'll show it on the face, and our languages, our signing is even a lot bigger. I'm so tired of this. And so when we're sad, our signs are more small and our face is more subdued. And it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm so tired. I'm just frustrated. So our language is a lot more, our signing space becomes smaller. And so like right now, I'm signing normal. But this facial expression is included in your language like this. Why are you tired? The eyebrows are going down. So that's part of a question. So that's ASL structure. So when the eyebrows are down, they're asking a WH question. Why? Who? Your name. What is your name? Or a yes or no question, the eyebrows go up. Do you like to drink coffee? And so that means it's a question. And so the eyebrows going up and down will help me to know how to answer. Oh, maybe there's a person very thin, and on the mouth, you will see how thin they are by how they show on their cheeks. And even if someone's very fat, their cheeks will puff out. It's not rude. It's just related to our language, and it's our facial expression. It's, again, like the tone of your voice when you are speaking. So when you work with the deaf community, it's like, oh, whoa, they are really rude with their facial expression. It's really part of their culture and part of your language. So something to keep in the back of your mind.
The deaf nod. Sometimes it can mean, yes, I understand you. I'm following you. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes if you're talking, maybe you're working with an interpreter and the deaf person is watching and kind of nodding along, saying, oh, I see, okay. Okay, yeah. Doesn't necessarily mean that they understand 100%. You might want to follow up with what was your understanding of that? Did you understand what they mean? And it's not that we're trying to confuse you, but we want to double back and just make sure that the process is going well and that you're able to understand and the person is able to understand you. Like, it's not necessarily saying that, no, I didn't understand you, but it also just know that just a head nod doesn't always mean, yes, I understand. And then large, fast gesturing might happen when under stress. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm being aggressive or out of control. It's just a way of communicating and expressing myself. It's not an indication of aggressive behavior. Now there's different modes of communication, like we've talked about: sign language, lip reading, or writing. And today with technology, it's amazing. If I use the app Big, I can show you that app. It's got a black background and yellow font, and I can change the colors to whatever I want. So as an example, if I go to the supermarket and I'm looking around for something and I need to ask somebody a question, I can have my app open. Sometimes I'll type it and have it ready. Or I can open this and have them speak into the phone, where it translates then to text, and then I can read what they say and type back to them. I'm able to read and write, so I'm able to use this with a hearing person. There are some deaf people who do not read and write well, and so it's difficult for them to communicate through text. So it's often better for them to have an interpreter provided. So there are a lot of different ways of communicating: signing, lip reading, writing, texting, using these apps. And there are a lot of apps out there that are really beneficial. I usually like to use Big because as I get older, it's harder for me to see. And having the black background with the yellow font in a large size is very clear for me. If I didn't, even without my glasses, I can probably read that. Some basic communication principles. Always feel free to ask, what can I do to make it easier for the two of us to communicate? Don't decide on your own what is best for the deaf person. Ask them what they need and how to make communication happen smoothly. It could become really frustrating and upsetting for people to make those decisions for us, and it leads to a communication breakdown and a resistance to want to continue to dialogue with that person. If you ask them, are you okay writing? They might say, sure, that's fine, or I can speak for myself. So it just depends on the individual, and you should always go by their wishes. I just saw somebody said something in chat. Let me just check that really quickly. Bob asked, can I get Big on the App Store? Do you mean Apple or Android? The Big app is free, yes. So there are a lot of different ways to communicate depending on the situation. which I'm going to get into in later slides. General communication. It's important to name the topic of the conversation or the discussion. For people who don't hear, it's important to give them some of that information ahead of time, which helps them to know what's going to be talked about. Especially if a person relies on lip reading, if they know the topic, then they're able to have less guesswork in trying to figure out what's being said, so they have some context. With COVID, the precautions that we've been using by staying 6 feet apart makes it very difficult for a person who is hard of hearing. Wearing a mask makes it much easier to hear, and it's impossible to lip read, which can be really very frustrating. Hearing aids lose their effectiveness the further away you get. So for people who rely on those, to have a distance between people makes it much more difficult to communicate. You should be able to use a tablet or an Android, anything like that. The big app should be available for any of them. It's not really big app. It's live transcript or live transcribe is an Android app, which is great for those who use Android to get a live transcription. Like right now on Zoom, we have captions which are automated speech recognition, or ASR, which is what's being used right now. It's not 100% perfect. There are some errors, some words get goofed, but that live transcribe is a great app for that. And Zoom, because this is a platform, it's different than that. And then also YouTube has auto transcriptions as well, but they're terrible compared to live transcribe. A lot of deaf and hard of hearing people use that Android-based application. Apple has a similar app, but it's not quite as good. It's a little bit different. So for Android users, and there's so many different apps out there, lots of technology that's really beneficial for the hard of hearing population. And the third thing on the screen, speak slowly, clearly, but do not yell or exaggerate your speaking style. Just speak at a normal pace and normal tone. If the deaf person doesn't understand you, they'll let you know, and then you can backtrack a little bit. You can see the picture, and the first picture on the screen there, you can see a fan, which causes some background noise, so it makes it a little bit more difficult to communicate or to be heard or understood, and that can cause some issues with communication. So you want to find a room that's got less noise or visual noise as well, so that it's easy to see each other and communicate clearly. And the second picture is really something for us deaf people. For a person who stands in front of a window with a bright light behind them, especially if we're trying to watch an interpreter, if the interpreter is in front of a bright light, it's nearly impossible to see them and understand what they're signing. So you'll have to adjust so that they're not standing in front of a window, maybe put them in front of a wall so that their signs are clear. And just trust the deaf person. If they tell you that they're not able to see you, they're not able to understand or access what's going on, don't fight back with them. Just make sure that they can get in a spot where everybody can be heard and seen clearly. Just trust their judgment and trust their need for accessibility. At first, they may not understand you, so you might have to rephrase your statement. It's important to make sure that they understand before you move forward. You can use body language, facial expression or visual aids to help in communication. And again, choose an environment that's conducive to communication so that everybody's understood clearly. It's very important for patience and positivity and having a relaxed demeanor with working with people. Be careful with your facial expressions in terms of your audience. You have to be really careful not to just roll your eyes. If somebody's talking to you and they just are like, oh my goodness, I have to work with this person. Oh, this deaf person. Why do I have to deal with this? We're going to feel that, and we're going to feel hurt by that, and we're not going to want to work with you necessarily. So we're looking for people who are willing to work with us and interact with us in a positive manner. Don't say things like, oh, it's nothing, oh, never mind, or this isn't important, because that's something that we grew up with in our families, our hearing friends. They'll say, oh, that's not important. You don't need to know this information. Well, I want to know that information. Everybody else is laughing. What's so funny? It really makes us feel bad when we're told it doesn't matter, or it's nothing, or you don't need to know. So just never do that. Never say those things to them. Just be willing to work with us and help us to understand as best as you can. Really makes us feel inferior when we are told that something isn't important when everybody else has access to that information. Take time to communicate. Be patient. And don't ignore or avoid interaction. That's something that I've experienced several times. I try to say hi to somebody and they freeze. They think, oh no, it's a deaf person. And then they just turn and walk away. It's like, well, I'm here. I needed a service. Can you come back? And then somebody else will come in and say, hi, did you need anything? And I want to say, yes, I did. What happened to the other person who was supposed to be helping me? Did they just not know how to interact with me, or what? They just avoided the situation altogether.
So speech reading tips. So I didn't see the interpreter switch, so we'll go ahead. So when you are talking with person, and a person relies on lip reading, just to be aware that wearing masks is really hard. And so use an iPad or a tablet to interact. When that person is done talking, the hearing person can look at what you spoke and read what you spoke, or the deaf person can read what you spoke, and you can have that interaction going back and forth. You don't want to put your hand in front of your mouth. You don't want to do this or put your paper in front of your mouth, because they depend on reading your lips, and so they need to see your whole face. And again, make sure there's no visual noise. Just make sure everything is clear around and there's excessive communication. And so, like, if you're speaking and you're looking all around and the hard of hearing person is trying to follow where you're looking, trying to follow where your lips are, it's important to not just sit and talk with that person face to face. And you can just say, do you mind? I'm going to go ahead and input all this information in the computer. Then you can turn your head and then look back at the hard of hearing person. But really, the deaf community, we prefer to have eye contact, to look directly in your eyes. If there's no eye contact, we, feel lost. We feel disconnected. And so there's no connection. And so it's important to have that eye contact. So if a person has a beard or a mustache that covers the lips, it's really hard for the hard of hearing person who relies on speech reading to read your lips. And so it's really important to not have hair covering your lips. And it's important to have good lighting as well. Restaurants are a real challenge for us because their lighting is really dim. And so to look at the menu, we have to put our phone, the flashlight on the menu to be able to read the menu because the light is dim. But in general, at work and places, for us to be able to have access, it's important to be able to have good, clear lighting so we can communicate back and forth with each other. So I forgot to mention, so this word of caution, this is a true fact. Only approximately 30% of English language is visible on the lip, making the remaining 70% effective at a guessing game. And so this is for the hard of hearing community. For me as a deaf person, I will understand maybe 1 or 2% that's on the lip. And the reason why I can understand that is they would ask me, can you read lips? I've had that over and over again. People will ask me throughout the years growing up. And so I'm used to that. And I'll say no, but then they'll start speaking and everything they're saying is going over my head. I do not know how to read lips. A hard of hearing community who is used to reading lips, they're good at it. But again, only 30% of what is on the lip are they able to understand. So you need to really check with them and make sure, are you understanding what I'm saying? If there's misunderstanding, then go back and speak it again. Use a tablet, speak in that tablet and allow them, the hard of hearing person, to read it. And so kind of assess the importance of having that communication access for both you and the hard of hearing person. Before I go ahead and do the next slide, I need to ask the interpreter. So I will have 3 words. So I will ask the interpreter to not use her voice, but just speak it. And so you have to guess what the interpreter spoke, not using their voice, what you see on the lips. So all 3 words are different. I mean, if I don't want to sign because there may be some of you in the audience that do know sign. So one moment, please. Okay, so watch the interpreter as she moves her lips and see what word she's speaking. She's not going to use her voice to say the word. Go ahead and put your response in the chat. Baby. Oh, good job. You got that right, baby. Good job. So the first one was baby. You're absolutely right. So the second word. Maybe. Good answer. Good. Maybe. Yes, exactly. So now the third word. So someone answered mommy. Anyone else? So pay me. Looks like Mimi. To be honest, for the first time the first time in my years of how many years I have presented this presentation, no one has answered it right. One person has answered them right. Pay me. The answer is pay me. Woohoo! Kudos to that person who answered right. Congratulations. Woohoo! To let you know, I mean, you can see these words. They do look the same. Baby, maybe, and pay me. It's like, what? For us, trying to depend on lip reading is hard. And so it's important that you set the topic up first, what we're going to talk about. And so then that list of words ends up being condensed. And so it makes more sense within that context. And so that's why I always say no when they ask me, can you read lips? It's like, no, I can't. I am deaf. I depend on sign language. I depend on an interpreter every day. And so no, or we can write, or I can use the big app as well. It's not perfect. It makes mistakes, but I can't, decipher what is being said. So thank you, interpreter. So now working with sign language interpreter, how does that work? What does that look like? So when you work with a deaf person, there is an interpreter there. Do not look at the interpreter, look at the deaf person and speak directly to the deaf person. It may sound kind of odd because the deaf person will be looking at the interpreter and they're not looking at you, but still go ahead. Don't look at the interpreter and while the interpreter is speaking. And a lot of times the deaf person may say, hey, don't look at the interpreter, look at me. So the second one is very common. Oh, tell her, tell him, tell her, tell him. That's very common. Do not use that phrase. Just talk directly to the deaf person. The interpreter is there to facilitate communication between the two of you. I have experienced this all the time, especially in the doctor's office. Oh, tell her, tell her. And I will advocate for myself and I will educate them. I'll educate the doctor. Please don't say, tell her, I've never experienced that. Or I'll show up. And I've asked them, have you worked with a deaf patient before? Oh, okay, fine, let me explain. While the interpreter is there. Okay. And then I'll do that. And so then when I show up again, they become used to it. But then there are some people that have an attitude. It's like, oh no, they will continue to say, tell her or tell him. Then I won't continue to see that doctor, which is unfortunate. So the interpreter will be interpreting information that is being said, but the interpreter will not give other information. They will just facilitate the information that's being said by the hearing person to the deaf person. They won't add any more information. So what I recently just mentioned, and the interpreter continued to speak after I put my hands down, because ASL is different than English. And so a lot of times they have to, when they see it in ASL, they've got to process it and then interpret it into ASL. And so sometimes the interpreter is behind in the process when they're speaking. And so it's important you understand that process. So I tend to wait and follow the interpreter. When I'm done speaking, I will look at the interpreter to make sure the interpreter is done speaking, then I will move on. So as I'm speaking, I'm presenting, and if the interpreter is way behind, they may put their finger up and say, oh, can you hold on just a minute? And then I will stop, allow the interpreter to catch up, and the interpreter will let me know to go ahead. And then, but sometimes if the interpreter is way behind, then they will put up their finger. So luckily we haven't had this. So luckily, since I've been following the interpreter, and I think the three of us are working together well. So the last part is important for you to send the interpreter a request to the agency. What does the assignment look like? What are the client's needs? If it's a deaf-blind client, then you need to let the agency know that the person is deaf-blind and they need to get somebody who does tactile or does tracking. And so you need to be able to provide accommodations. And so request what the deaf or deafblind or hard of hearing person needs. So someone asked if we would be able to get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. So yes, I can send it to Roz, the PowerPoint. It will be in a PDF form. So there's a other question. What is the difference between tactile and tracking? So tactile means the person, like for example, me, I'm a deaf person, and the deafblind person is sitting in front of me. And this is a person that cannot see at all, will depend on tactile interpreting, and they will put their hands on top of mine. And then I will be signing. And the deaf-blind person that is fully blind, they are so skilled. I mean, I'm not skilled in that, but they are with tactile interpreting. They are skilled in understanding tactile. And so for tracking, they don't put their hands on your hands. They'll put their hands on their arms, on your arms, and they will track it that way. And they will follow the communication that way. Does that help answer your question?
Need training for both. Okay, I will give that tip to Roz. Now on this slide, you can see the differences between a certified interpreter or a signer or family member. The certified interpreter slide means they're a professional interpreter who is credentialed. They follow a code of professional conduct, or CPC. They are trained and credentialed. They understand the interpreter role. They're fluent in ASL and knows deaf culture. Professional interpreters have taken training. They've been to interpreter training programs, ITPs, and they continue to take CEUs to maintain their profession. They have to take an exam in order to become certified. And it depends on the state. Some states require licensure. On the other side, a signer or family member is not necessarily certified or professional. They're not bound by the Code of Professional Conduct. They may not understand or know the role of an interpreter. They may know a little bit about deaf culture, but there's a vast difference between these two sets of folks. So if you're using a signer or family member, liability could be a huge issue if there is disruption in communication. So that's something you don't want to gamble on. It's always best to use a certified interpreter. I myself has worked as a client, worked with a client who was involved in a domestic violence situation. 911 had to be called, and the children had to interpret for this situation, the children in the home. And of course, they're traumatized by that. They're terrified that there are police officers in their home, and now they're being forced to interpret between the police and their parents. It causes a world of confusion. And so the point is, do not use children as interpreters or family members as interpreters. I worked with another client who showed up to a doctor's appointment with their mother, and there was no interpreter. So mom was going to be interpreting this appointment, and there was bad news given about the health of the client. And immediately the family member started crying, but the deaf person didn't know why they were crying, what was going on. They didn't know what news was being shared. And eventually they found out that they had a very serious form of cancer. And it would have been much better for everybody involved to have an interpreter in the room. It's important to provide an interpreter. If you want your mom to be there with you, that's fine, but provide an interpreter too, because it's very important to be able to separate the role of being the interpreter and being the family member who's obviously going to be emotional in a case like that. And it can be very traumatic. The deaf person's going to wonder, am I okay? What's going on? Why are you crying? And then finally finding out that they have cancer is devastating. I just want to highlight again and emphasize to use a certified interpreter. Interpreters know their role. They know to stay neutral. I'm going to get into this in the next slide. Here we go. Give you a second to read that. This comes from the Americans with Disability Act. This is the verbiage that's used, and it's very important for interpreters to be effective, accurate, and impartial. They also need to know how to interpret in specific settings with particular vocabulary or terminology. If they're in a courtroom, putting an interpreter in there who has only worked in the K-12 system for many years may not necessarily know the correct protocols or be effective in a courtroom as an interpreter. If it's a medical situation and they're interpreting in school for the majority of the time, and then they're placed in a medical situation, they may not know the right information or the right verbiage, terminology to use. So when making assignments for court, they need to know that the agency is sending the correct person, that they need to be certified in legal interpreting. They need to have experience in that arena. And if it's a medical situation, use interpreters who are familiar with that setting. K-12 interpreters are a completely separate system. It's a completely different animal. And they have their own information, their own sets of information and knowledge that they can use, but that might not be appropriate for all settings. So for a signer or family member, they're not going to know any of these things. They haven't been trained. They could get very personal. They could become impartial and start advocating when it's not their role to do so. This is what the system in Hawaii looks like. There's the credential. Hawaii does not have licensure. They're not required to be licensed, but they do have a credentialed system. And here's ours in New Mexico. We have state licensure, meaning all interpreters are required to have a license in order to interpret in the state. If they're not licensed to interpret, they can get in big trouble. They could be fined for interpreting without a license. They could even do jail time. So I think it's important to have those credentials and to be familiar with them. You can see the IDs there on the bottom. These are for community interpreters. And the red one is a provisional. So they just graduated from an ITP, for example. They've passed the written test, but haven't done the performance quite yet. So once they are able to do that, they keep that for 5 years. They continue their training until they're ready to do the performance. And then once they're credentialed, then they get their permanent community interpreter ID. So, and there's 12 different licensures for the state. There's community interpreting. I should say there's two. There's two tracks. Two for community interpreting and the provisional license. And then there's also K-12 or educational test that they would take, which is solely for educational, not for community. If you want to do both, you have to take both tests and be certified in both or licensed in both areas. For the educational system, they also have a provisional license. They have to take the test first. If they fail it, then they're not able to continue interpreting. And that's different than what is happening in Hawaii. Hawaii has this. credential. And our deaf community usually will ask, are you certified? And then the interpreter can show their credential to know what level they are, what certification they hold. And so this gives you an idea of what those credentials look like. VRI is very popular all across our country. It's being used a great deal, being used in medical situations, which brings a lot of issues. On the first picture you see there in the top left-hand corner, there's a very blurry picture of a woman, which happens all the time because the internet at the facility, their high-speed internet isn't strong enough or fast enough. And so it's very glitchy, which makes communication ineffective. Deaf people are very frustrated with this because it happens all the time. They prefer to have an on-site interpreter. Or the facility may get a better internet service and provide better Wi-Fi. That is an issue that comes up a lot with Wi-Fi. It's better to have hardwired service so that the screen is clear, or to increase their broadband up the numbers so that it's much smoother. And hold on just a second, I saw something pop up in chat. Okay, Bob asked me in New Mexico. Is what in New Mexico, Bob? And I'll just keep going until I see your response. Okay, then the next picture says, please wait, which is again, very common for VRI. You click on the link, ready to be connected, and you have to wait for it to load. Meanwhile, communication is not happening while you're waiting, and they'll say, oh, sorry, it's not working. So then what, I have to reschedule? I took time off of work to come and be here. Now I have to reschedule and ask for time off again. It's very, very frustrating for us. So having better broadband or having an on-site interpreter is key. And then you can see the third picture there, looks like somebody being electrocuted. So that's somebody who doesn't know how to link up the VRI, doesn't know how to get the device working, which it takes time. They come in, try to figure out how to use it. They're asking me to set it up. I was like, well, I don't know how to set up. This isn't mine. I even may know, but I understand that. I just am sitting there waiting because the staff really needs to be trained to learn how to use VRI. Once they're trained, then it can become much smoother. And most of the time, having an on-site interpreter is just preferred. It just makes it much easier. 1 second. Yes, about licensure is required in New Mexico. Yes, that's correct. Not all states require licensure, but it is required in the state of New Mexico. What's important is no matter what state, make sure you have an interpreter who is credentialed or certified. It can become really sticky when they're not. For us, it's important that they have licensure, just like doctors have to be licensed in order to practice. Interpreters should be licensed too. So if there's any sort of problem, then liability is taken care of, because in some states, they don't require anything. If there's any sort of mishap that happens with interpreting, then it's quite a gamble and a pretty big liability. Okay. The fourth picture shows the sound icon, which means the sound isn't working. So it seems like everything's going well, but the folks aren't able to hear each other. And this is an issue that comes up a lot too. I've experienced this several times. It ends up being a big waste of time. If I show up somewhere ready for an appointment or an assignment, and any one of these things happen, it ends up being a waste of time. And it's just better to have an on-site interpreter. Everything is going to be much smoother that way. Okay, let me check the chat. Great. Thanks. Other issues, a couple of issues here. First one is the doctor is using VRI. And you got the doctor facing VRI, but not the deaf person. So it should be pointed at me, not the doctor, because the doctor is able to hear the information that's coming from the screen, and the deaf person should have a clear line of view to the interpreter on screen. And then in another picture, will be an appointment, everything will be going well, and then they'll say, okay, all done, click, bye. And it's, wait a second, I wasn't done. I had more questions, but they've already disconnected and taken off to their next appointment. So, but I had more questions. What's important is that you ask, are there any other questions before we hang up? Just simply ask that question. That way, if I do have more questions, then I can get them answered. And they can say, okay, are we all set? Is it okay to disconnect? And you say, yeah, it's fine to hang up. Considerations when using a virtual platform. First of all, there's several platforms. Zoom is very deaf friendly. We're able to pin the interpreter on our screen. If multi-pin is enabled, then I can have 2 or 3 interpreters on screen ready for me. If I'm not able to have multi-pinning capabilities, then I have to pin one interpreter. When it's time to switch, I have to search through all of the rest of the people to try to find the other interpreter and then pin them. And having that ability is really helpful. There's Google Meet. Captioning is pretty great there for hard of hearing folks. Identifying people who are speaking, so it keeps up with what's being said pretty well. It's not great for deaf folks. Google Meet, I've seen it used in the courtroom, and I've had to, thank goodness, I could rely on the captioning on that platform, because I had to look all over to try to find the interpreter. So Zoom is just better when using an interpreter. Let me see what are the other ones. There's Microsoft Teams. There's, can't remember. I know there's a lot of different platforms, but not all of them are very friendly for deaf folks. Some of them, whenever somebody different speaks, the camera jumps over to that person and the interpreter goes away. You can't even see the interpreter on the screen anymore because it's following the sound of voices. Having the ability to pin the interpreter is helpful and makes it much easier to understand what's going on. So those are just some things to keep in mind if you need to use one of those platforms.
So my presentation is all done. If you have any questions or comments, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.